Close your eyes and focus on the sensation. The stone floor beneath you is cold and damp, vibrating rhythmically against your skin. That vibration is the sound of 60,000 people stomping their feet directly above your head. The air in your tiny cell is thick, smelling of rusted iron, stale urine, and the copper tang of fresh blood. You are waiting in the pitch black, praying for the noise to stop, but when the cheering finally dies down, a worse sound begins. Heavy sandals slapping against wet stone, the grinding of a heavy key in a lock. The door creaks open, and a silhouette blocks the dim light. It is the man the crowd was just cheering for, covered in gore, adrenaline pumping, and looking for his reward. This isn't a deleted scene from a dark fantasy movie, and it's not a nightmare. This was a standard Tuesday evening in the glory days of Rome. While Hollywood sells you the myth of the noble rebel fighting for freedom in the sun, they conveniently cut to black before the sun goes down. They never show you what happened in the hyper-organized shadows of the underground tunnels once the emperor left his box. We are talking about a state-sponsored system of abuse that was as efficient as the Roman legions and as cold as the marble statues they built. It wasn't random violence. It was a government-sanctioned perk. What I'm about to reveal to you is the evidence that history books deliberately sanitize. We are going to examine the physical scars left on the basement walls of the greatest arena on Earth. Scars literally made by fingernails desperate for escape. This is the story of the carnal victory, a practice so vile it permanently stains the legacy of the empire. If you stick around until the very end, I promise you one thing. You will never be able to look at a picture of the Colosseum the same way again without feeling a chill run down your spine. Pop culture has effectively gaslit us for the last century. When you picture a gladiator, you likely imagine a stoic warrior like Spartacus, fighting for honor and turning rebellion into a heroic art form. We see the clashing swords, the roar of the crowd, and the dramatic thumbs down. But the movies always cut away too early. They fade to black, right when the real horror begins. They ignore the twilight hours, that specific window of time after the spectators went home to dinner, when the grand spectacle transformed into a mechanical, state-run nightmare. What happened in the dark wasn't combat, it was a massacre of the helpless. Modern historians were so horrified by what they uncovered in the archives that they had to invent a new Latin phrase just to categorize it. Victoria carnalis, or the flesh victory. The Romans didn't have a special name for it. Why would they? You don't name the air you breathe or the water you drink. To the Roman elite, using human beings as disposable party favors wasn't an atrocity. It was just standard protocol. It wasn't a secret shame kept behind closed doors. It was as mundane and accepted as filing taxes or paving a road. We aren't speculating based on rumors. We have the receipts. Ancient writers like Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca didn't shy away from describing this world. They detailed a system where conquered women were stacked in underground depots like bags of grain. These weren't crimes of passion or random acts of soldiers gone rogue. This was the government itself, acting as the perpetrator. The same brilliant civilization that engineered the aqueducts to bring fresh water to the city applied that same cold, mathematical efficiency to the industrialization of sexual violence. Women were distributed to performing gladiators not as people, but as rations, literally indistinguishable from a bonus check or an extra loaf of bread. But before we descend into the literal underground to see how this machinery worked, I need you to take a second. If you believe that history should be told in full, even when it makes us uncomfortable, hit that like button right now. It helps get this truth out to more people. And while you're there, drop a comment telling me, Did you learn about this in school? Or is this the first time you're hearing about the flesh victory? Because what we are about to discuss isn't just about Rome. It's about what happens when absolute power meets zero accountability. To truly grasp the nightmare that unfolded in those stone chambers, you first have to understand how the empire converted breathing, feeling people into spreadsheet data. This wasn't random sadism. It was industrial-scale dehumanization. The moment a Roman legion crushed a rebellion in Gaul or leveled a city in Judea, they stopped seeing human beings and started seeing inventory. It operated like a grim factory assembly line. Military-age men were shipped off to die in the silver mines, children were auctioned in the markets of the East, and women were stamped as captiva, war prizes owned by the state. Under Roman law, these women were stripped of their personhood and reclassified as res, literally things. Legally, they held the exact same status as a wooden chair or a mule. You couldn't commit a crime against them because in the eyes of Rome, you cannot assault an object. The public games were the stage where this dehumanization was broadcast to the world. We often think of the Colosseum as a sports venue, but it was actually a political theater designed to break the psychology of anyone watching. When a captured Germanic king was fed to a tiger, the audience wasn't just watching a man die. They were watching a demonstration of what happens when you defy the eagle. But the true depravity kicked in during the midday intermission. While the wealthy elite left their seats to enjoy a civilized lunch, the arena floor hosted what historians call mythological reenactments. These were high-budget plays based on classic Greek myths, with one horrifying twist. The special effects were real, and the actors were condemned prisoners forced to die on cue. The poet Martial, writing in the 1st century, describes these scenes with a casual detachment that makes modern readers sick to their stomachs. He treats these executions like he is reviewing a local restaurant or a new play. He describes a prisoner dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician who charmed nature, being led into an arena designed to look like a forest. But instead of charming the animals, the man was mauled by a bear, while 50,000 people ate honeyed dates and cheered. In an even darker passage, Martial details a woman forced to reenact the myth of Pasiphae. I won't describe the explicit biological mechanics, but it involved a woman being assaulted by a bull until she succumbed to her injuries. The absolute terrifying part of this isn't just that it happened, but how it was received. Martial wasn't writing these accounts to expose the cruelty. He was writing them to compliment the emperor on the realism of the show. He praised the production value. The Roman state had successfully designed a system where the torture of a human being was consumed as light lunchtime entertainment, wedged between the morning beast hunts and the afternoon gladiator duels. This environment of casual bureaucratic evil was the exact same machine that processed the women held in the basement, turning them into part of a bonus package for the fighters. But here is where the story takes a sharp turn into the psychology of the men who were receiving these prizes. Gladiators lived in a psychological paradox that would shatter a modern mind. Imagine being a prisoner on death row, possessing fewer legal rights than a stray dog, yet having your face plastered on billboards like a Marvel superhero. They were the absolute lowest caste of society, yet they were the ultimate sex symbols of the ancient world. Aristocratic women were obsessed with them. Graffiti preserved in Pompeii calls one fighter the doctor of broken hearts and another the nightly sigh of the girls. It went beyond just fandom. Merchants actually scraped the sweat and dirt off a gladiator's skin after a fight, mixed it with olive oil, and sold it as a high-end aphrodisiac face cream. The Roman elite were literally bottling the perspiration of the men they enslaved. But beneath the lust and the worship, Rome lived in a constant, sweating panic. The empire had never psychologically recovered from 73 BC, when a gladiator named Spartacus decided he had played the game long enough. He didn't just escape, he raised an army of 70,000 angry slaves and humiliated the Roman legions for 2 years. When the empire finally crushed the revolt, they turned the Appian Way into a highway of death, crucifying 6,000 survivors, one dying man every 40 meters for 200 kilometers. That image seared a permanent trauma into the Roman soul. Every owner of a gladiator school knew that the men sleeping in his barracks were dangerous living weapons who had once come terrifyingly close to burning Rome to the ground. So, how do you control a monster you created? How do you keep a man who kills for a living from killing you? You can't rely solely on punishment. You need to make him complicit. You offer him a taste of the power he hates. The state developed a system of calculated rewards, extra protein, coin purses, and the distant promise of freedom. But the texts hint at a darker, more immediate bonus for a job well done: access to the captives. If you believe this kind of hidden history deserves to be exposed, hit that like button right now and drop a comment asking why to help boost this video. The state needed these men to feel like conquerors in their own right, so they wouldn't turn their swords against their masters. The historical documentation is frustratingly patchy, scattered like breadcrumbs across different texts. But when you overlay the writings of Marshall with modern archaeological findings, the picture sharpens into high definition. The process appears to have been chillingly administrative. Picture the scene. A gladiator, still heaving from the exertion of combat, sweat cutting through the layers of dust and dried blood on his skin, is escorted off the sands. He isn't taken to the showers or the medical bay immediately. Instead, a low-level bureaucrat or a school official guides him down into the hypogeum, the massive, labyrinthine stone gut of the amphitheater. They walk past the growling leopards pacing in their cages, past the slaves hoisting heavy scenery with ropes, moving deeper into the humid dark where the air smells of oil lamps and fear. They arrive at a specific sector of the underground network that archaeologists have spent decades trying to contextualize. These aren't your standard holding pens for awaiting trial. Evidence from the ruins in Capua, Pompeii, and beneath the Colosseum itself reveals a distinct, disturbing architectural pattern. We find rows of small claustrophobic rooms, barely 10 to 15 square meters. Inside, the design features are specific and damning. There are stone benches cut into the walls, and rusted iron rings are anchored deep into the masonry at waist height and near the floor. The doors were heavy oak, reinforced with thick iron bands, and crucially, they were designed to lock only from the outside. These rooms were engineered for leverage and containment, not for housing prisoners of war in any humane sense. The women trapped inside these stone boxes had already been processed through the empire's cold bureaucracy. They were the captivi damnati, the condemned spoils of war. A scribe, likely bored with his daily tasks, would have catalogued them in a ledger not by their names, but by their origin and utility. Female, Germanic, grade A. When the gladiator arrived, the interaction was treated like checking out equipment from a warehouse. A guard would unlock a designated cell based on the gladiator's rank or performance, or perhaps the fighter was given a choice, treated like a soldier cashing in a voucher. The door would open, the gladiator would step in, and the heavy lock would click shut again. The texts might be silent on the specifics, but the architecture screams the story loud and clear. To the Roman state, this system was a stroke of logistical genius. It solved a complex management problem with zero additional budget. The women cost the state nothing. They were already classified as stolen property. The gladiators felt like kings, without the state having to grant them actual freedom or political power. It was a feedback loop of dominance. The gladiator exerts absolute power over the captive, just as the emperor exerts absolute power over the gladiator. It reinforced the core philosophy of Rome. If you win, you take. One ancient source summarizes this brutality perfectly, noting that the victor claims his prize exactly how the empire claims a province, by the sheer right of violence. And that isn't even the darkest part. The walls themselves have something to tell us. Let's talk about the physical evidence, because stones don't lie. When Victorian-era archaeologists first started digging out the hypogeum, they were obsessed with the cool stuff. The elevators, the trapdoors, the complex water drainage systems. They wanted to see the engineering marvels. But as they swept away centuries of dirt in the deeper, less functional recesses of the complex, they found rooms that made them uncomfortable. Rooms that didn't fit the blueprint of a staging area or a storage locker. In the amphitheater of Capua, the very place where Spartacus started his revolt, archaeologists discovered graffiti scratched into the plaster of these cell walls. This isn't the political slogans or obscene jokes you find in the public bathrooms of Pompeii. These are the desperate final messages of the condemned. One inscription, etched in crude, broken Latin by someone whose first language was clearly something else, roughly translates to, "I was Aemilia of the Brigantes. I watched my children die. Now I am nothing." Another message, written in a script resembling Celtic, is a simple plea. To any god who is listening, let me die before the sun rises. These scratches are the only surviving testimony of the women who were erased from the history books. This infrastructure wasn't improvised. These rooms were purpose-built with the same deliberate planning as the royal box. It suggests a terrifying reality. The abuse wasn't a glitch in the system, it was the system. The uniformity of these cells across different arenas in the empire proves this was a standardized practice. Just as every McDonald's has the same fryer layout, every major Roman arena had the same facilities for processing captives. It was the McDonaldization of sexual slavery. Skeptics might argue we are projecting modern morality onto ancient architecture, but when you combine the iron rings, the locking mechanisms, and the bureaucratic records, the conclusion is inescapable. We have to confront what life was actually like for the women inside those cells. They weren't just generic prisoners. They were survivors of an apocalypse. Imagine watching your entire world burn down. Your home torched by a legionnaire's torch, your husband butchered in the mud, your children ripped from your arms to be sold in a market you'll never see. You are then marched in chains for hundreds of miles, stripped naked, inspected like cattle, and thrown into a dark hole beneath the noisiest place on earth. You spend your days listening to the muffled screams of people dying above you, knowing that the only time your door opens, it's because a man who just killed for a living wants to take something from you. There was no hope of rescue, no diplomatic immunity. You had simply ceased to exist as a person and become a line item in the emperor's budget. But sometimes the system cracked. Rome loved to pretend it was the beacon of civilization, bringing order to barbarians, but occasionally the mask slipped. This happened when the violence became too visible, too awkward for the delicate sensibilities of the elite. This brings us to the weirdest anomaly in the whole bloody history of the arena: female gladiators. Yes, they existed. Ancient sources are conflicted. Some were slaves forced into the role, but others were high-born Roman women who voluntarily entered the arena, seemingly addicted to the adrenaline and the taboo celebrity status. But the existence of the gladiatrix caused a glitch in the Roman matrix. The satirist Juvenal wrote scathing columns about women who wear helmets and reject their sex, mocking them not for the violence, but for the indecency of it all. The breaking point came in 200 AD. Emperor Septimius Severus was attending games in Antioch that featured female fighters. According to the historian Cassius Dio, who was actually sitting there, the crowd reaction was bizarre. The Greek section of the audience watched with shocked silence, but the Roman soldiers and citizens started jeering. They began shouting obscene sexual comments, treating the combat not as a fight, but as a live porno. They couldn't separate the woman from the object. The emperor was reportedly mortified, not because women were hacking at each other with swords, but because the crowd's crude reaction was ruining the dignity of his political pageant. So, Severus banned women from the arena. But here is the twist that should make your blood boil. He didn't ban the violence against women. He just banned it from the main stage. The female captives in the basement, they were still there. The prizes for the male gladiators, that system didn't change one bit. The emperor didn't have a moral awakening. He just had a PR problem. He moved the abuse back into the shadows where it couldn't embarrass him in front of foreign dignitaries. It's the ultimate proof that the cruelty wasn't the issue. The visibility was. Even when Rome officially converted to Christianity in the 4th century, this machinery didn't stop. The games dragged on for decades under Christian emperors. It wasn't until a monk named Telemachus literally jumped into the arena to stop a fight and was torn to pieces by the angry fans that the gladiatorial combat was finally outlawed in 404 AD. But even that didn't save the women in the dark. The infrastructure of slavery and the concept of women as war booty persisted long after the Colosseum fell silent. The system didn't die because Rome grew a conscience. It died because the empire collapsed and the supply chain of captives broke down. The machine ran out of fuel, but it never learned to be human. Next time you see a travel vlogger posting a smiling selfie in front of the Colosseum's arches, remember what lies directly beneath their feet. The stones in the basement are still there. The iron rings bolted into the walls haven't rusted away completely. If you look closely enough, you can still see the scratches where desperate women tried to dig their way out of a living hell. The ledgers that reduced human lives to inventory numbers are sitting in Vatican archives right now, gathering dust, available to anyone brave enough to read them. We need to stop romanticizing the Roman Empire as just a cradle of democracy and cool statues. The Colosseum isn't just a monument to engineering. It is a tombstone for the countless souls who were fed into the grinder of imperial power. It stands as absolute proof that civilization can be both incredibly advanced and unspeakably cruel at the exact same time. The roar of the crowd may have faded centuries ago, but if you listen to the silence in those underground chambers, the story is still screaming at us. So, ask yourself, what other horrors are buried under the monuments we admire today? If you want to keep digging up the parts of history they tried to bury, hit that subscribe button for history's hiding scars and ring the bell. We are going to keep shining a light into the darkest corners of the past, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. Leave a comment below. Does knowing this change how you see ancient Rome? I'll see you in the next investigation.